Most people think retirement changed because somebody invented a better account. That is too shallow. Retirement changes. Whenever the river of money changes direction for decades, the river ran through one main channel: get a job, hope your employer offers a 401k, contribute what you can, maybe get a match. Stay employed long enough that the system keeps feeding your retirement bucket. That was the deal. And like most deals in America, it worked much better for people who are already standing in the right room. If you had a stable employer, a good payroll system, decent benefits, and enough income left over to contribute, the machine helped you. If you were a gig worker, a contractor, a part-time worker, a low-income earner, somebody bouncing between jobs, somebody building a life outside the neat employer box, the machine did not hate you. It just barely saw you. That is the real story. Not that one account was morally good and another one is morally bad. Not that the 401k suddenly became useless. And not that one politician waved a pen and replaced the retirement system overnight. What changed is more important than that. The country is quietly moving from employer-gated retirement access toward government-guided retirement access. That is a much bigger shift because when the gate moves, the money moves, and when the money moves, the stock market, the economy, inflation, and the balance between labor and capital all begin to move with it. That is what I want you to understand. Not the headline version, the machine version. The 401k was never just a retirement account. It was a sorting mechanism, a way of deciding who gets invited into the long compounding machine and who is left trying to build a future with wages alone. The people inside the system got tax advantages, payroll convenience, and often employer contributions. The people outside the system got lectures about discipline and very little structural help. That is why the access question matters so much more than people realize. If more than 50 million workers sit outside employer-sponsored retirement plans, then the problem is not just personal responsibility. The problem is that the capital escalator was never built all the way down to the ground floor. And that is where this new shift becomes interesting. The document you gave me is loud, but underneath the noise, it is pointing at something real, a government-led push to create a simple, portable, low-cost IRA entry point for workers who do not have a 401k. Changes the retirement conversation from, does your boss let you in? Can the state help route you into the market anyway? That is a very different question. And it matters because America is not just a wage economy, it is an asset economy. The people who own productive assets live in a different future from the people who only sell labor into the system. That has always been true, but it becomes much more visible in periods when inflation keeps eating wages, debt keeps rising, and asset prices keep receiving structural support from policy, tax design, and monetary expansion. That is exactly why this story matters. Now let me be very precise, because clarity matters. The Trump IRA, as it is being framed publicly, is not some giant government-run investment account where Washington takes over the stock market and enrolls the whole population into one new national pension. The 30th of April, 2026 executive order instead directs the Treasury to establish Trumpera.gov as a marketplace and access point for simple, portable, low-cost private sector ERA options with the federal saver S-match routed to qualifying accounts. The $1,000 annual government contribution for eligible lower and middle income workers comes from the Saver S-Match created under Secure 2.0, not from a brand new retirement law invented out of thin air. This spring, Wayside Fayturn 856,185 search 0, Fayturn 856,185 search 3, Fayturn 856,185 news 40, Fayturn 856,185 news 42 Fay. That correction matters because if you do not understand where the money actually comes from, you cannot understand what the system is trying to do. The document you uploaded says Trump quietly replaced the 401k. That is not literally true, but something more subtle may be true. He may have accelerated the political and cultural shift away from employer exclusivity as the main entrance to retirement investing. That is not the same as replacement. It is arguably more important because replacement is a press conference. A new entrance ramp is a structural change. And structural changes are where the real money gets made. So let us start with the 401k itself. People talk about the 401k as if it were a universal feature of adult life. It is not. It is a conditional privilege. You need the right employer. The employer has to offer the plan. The menu of investments may be excellent or terrible. The fees may be low or predatory. The employer match may be generous or non-existent. The rollover process may be simple or annoying. And if your work life is messy, modern, freelance, gig-based, or fragmented, the whole thing may never fit you cleanly at all. That is the first weakness, access. The second weakness is cost. The uploaded source leans hard on the idea that average 401k fees are high, using a Kiplinger figure of 1.26%. That number is real in context, but the context matters. Kiplinger notes that very small plans under $1 million in assets average around 1.26%, while very large plans with more than $1 billion in assets average much lower, around 0.27%. In other words, some workers really are getting gouged in small or mediocre plans, while others inside large plans are paying very little. The broad truth is not all 401k are expensive. The broad truth is many workers are stuck in plan structures they did not choose, and some of those structures are bad. Fay-Site, Fay-Turn, 856,185 search 2 Fay, that is enough to matter because over a 30-year compounding life, fees are not a rounding error. They are a silent transfer from your future to somebody else. S-fee schedule. A 1% fee sounds small when spoken quickly. It sounds criminal when multiplied by decades. If a person invests $500 a month for 30 years, and the difference between a low-cost fund and a high-cost fund compounds long enough, the final outcome can diverge by 6 figures, not because one manager stole a suitcase of cash, because friction compounds too. That is one of the darkest and least appreciated laws in finance. Compounding is not only your friend, it is also the friend of every drag, every leak, every silent fee, every structural disadvantage you tolerate for too long. That is why lower cost access matters. And that is why a capped fee retirement menu on a government-guided marketplace could matter a lot more than people think. Now let us look at the next piece, portability. This is where modern work humbles old retirement design. A 401k was built for a world where people stayed with one employer, or at least moved through a narrower set of long-duration employment tracks. Modern labor is noisier. People switch jobs more, they freelance, they drive, they consult, they stack income streams, they move in and out of self-employment, they take breaks, they build side businesses, they re-enter, they patch work together across multiple systems. That is not a flaw in the worker. It is the reality of the modern economy, and a retirement design that assumes stable employer continuity is simply less fitted to that world than it once was. That is why portability matters. A retirement account tied to the worker rather than the employer shifts the psychological center of the whole arrangement. You are no longer borrowing retirement access from your boss. You are carrying it with you. That sounds like a small improvement. It is not. It changes identity. The worker stops being a guest in somebody else. S benefits architecture. The worker becomes the owner of his own capital pipeline. That matters. Now let us get to the emotionally explosive piece, the match. Everybody loves the match. And why shouldn't they? Free money feels like validation. An employer match is one of the few moments in ordinary financial life where the system visibly rewards good behavior. Put in $1, get some extra dollars. That is a beautiful incentive. It is also one of the biggest reasons workers cling to employer-sponsored plans even when the plan itself is mediocre, because the match feels impossible to refuse. That is why the government match matters so much, not because the government suddenly became generous in the abstract, because matching contributions are one of the strongest behavioral nudges in all of retirement design. The official structure here matters. Under the saver, S match, lower, and middle. Income workers who contribute to qualifying accounts can receive up to a $1,000 federal contribution, with the benefit phasing out as income rises. Reuters and AP both note that the basic Trumpera.gov rollout is designed to coincide with this 2027 Saver SMATCH implementation. The administration is clearly trying to convert a relatively dry tax credit concept into something that feels psychologically closer to an employer match for workers who never had one. Fay-Site, Fay-Turn, 856,185 News 40, Fay-Turn, 856,185 News 42, Fay-Turn, 856,185 News 44 Fay. That is politically smart. It is also economically important because once the worker experiences matching contributions, the retirement account stops feeling like pure sacrifice and starts feeling like leverage. That emotional shift is a very big deal. People do not respond only to spreadsheets. They respond to reinforcement. A low-income worker who feels that his contribution gets met by something outside himself becomes far more likely to view the account as a machine worth feeding, and once a machine gets fed regularly, the market starts getting a new stream of buyers. That is where the story turns from personal finance into macroeconomics. Most people still look at retirement policy as if it belongs in the same drawer as tax forms and benefits brochures. They are missing the larger point. Retirement infrastructure is capital market plumbing. The 401k was not just a worker benefit. It was one of the greatest stock market distribution systems ever built. Payroll money flowed automatically into funds. Funds bought equities. Equities got a steady river of demand. That river helped shape the entire modern American market structure. It helped make buy the index one of the most powerful strategies in middle-class wealth building. And it helped financialize the future by turning retirement into an endless bid for stocks and bonds. Now imagine what happens when you extend a version of that pipe to tens of millions more workers, not all at once, not perfectly, but directionally what happens is not mysterious. More buyers, more automatic contributions, more structurally recurring flows, more people being trained to think of the stock market not as a casino for rich people, but as the default retirement machine they now also belong to. That matters. The amount being discussed publicly for this first wave is not civilization changing on day one. Estimates around $32 to $68 billion of additional stock market related flows are not enough to cancel recessions, erase bear markets, or make valuations irrelevant, but they are absolutely enough to matter at the margin, and markets are set at the margin. The difference between an asset that has a new recurring buyer base and one that does not can be enormous over time. Fay turn 59 file 0 Fay. This is the first mechanism I want you to remember. The access mechanism when more workers can be turned into regular asset buyers through simpler, cheaper, more portable structures. The country is not merely changing retirement access. It is widening the ownership class. That is a very bullish force over long periods, but that is only one side of the story. The other side is darker because free money is never free. I have said for years that the most expensive kind of money is free money, and I still believe it. When the government says it will contribute to retirement accounts, the public tends to hear generosity. I hear financing. Where does the money come from? There are only a few honest answers. Either the government funds it through current revenue or through borrowing or through the kind of monetary accommodation that eventually shows up somewhere as inflationary pressure. Those are the choices. And the fiscal backdrop matters. The uploaded source points out that the United States is already running a large gap between what it collects and what it spends. That is directionally correct. The federal government is deeply deficit financed, and adding any new recurring commitment matters because it sits on top of a debt structure that already needs constant borrowing. If retirement access is widened by adding another flow of public support, that support does not float in from heaven. It enters the system through the same debt and monetary architecture that already keeps the current fiscal machine alive. Fay turn 59 file 0 Fay, that is the second mechanism, the inflation mechanism. If government support expands retirement contributions while the state itself remains structurally dependent on debt, then you are not just watching a retirement reform, you are watching a new channel through which public borrowing and future monetary softness can end up indirectly supporting asset prices. That matters because it changes who wins. The person living only on wages experiences the pressure first through a weaker dollar, stickier living costs, and a system that still feels unaffordable. The person who owns productive assets experiences the same policy environment very differently. He experiences it through rising nominal asset prices, expanding participation, and capital market support. That is what so many people miss. The system does not treat savers and owners the same. And retirement policy often becomes another way of widening that gap unless a person understands the game early enough to step onto the right side of it. This is why I think the most important sentence in the whole story is not Trump IRA replaces the 401k. It is this: retirement policy is becoming another engine that pushes more people and more money toward the stock market at the very same time that the state remains willing to support demand through debt finance policy. That is the real event. Now, does this mean the stock market only goes up from here? Of course not. That is childish. Every time somebody discovers a structural bullish force, somebody else instantly turns it into a reason to stop thinking. I will not do that. More buyers do not cancel valuation. More recurring flows do not cancel recessions. More government-guided access does not erase bad businesses, bad management teams, bad timing, bad policy, or bad luck. Volatility will remain, probably more of it, In fact, one of the more honest observations in the uploaded document is that when more money is constantly being routed into markets, the swings can get bigger, not smaller floods of new capital support prices over time, but they also create more emotional intensity around dips, flows, and policy expectations. That means drawdowns still happen. It may even mean that when they happen, they become even better buying opportunities for the people who are prepared. Fay file a site, Fay turn 59 file 0 Fay. That is the third mechanism. The volatility mechanism, new money into markets, is bullish over time. It is not calming over time. It can create bigger waves and bigger waves for prepared people, create bigger wealth windows. That is why I do not hear this story as the government will make everybody rich. I hear it as the government is quietly widening and subsidizing participation in a system that already rewards owners more than workers. That is a very different reading. Now let us get practical. If you believe more recurring retirement, money will find its way into broad equity exposure. Then the cleanest place to stand is usually not in some fragile fantasy stock that just got mentioned by a YouTuber. It is where the flows are most likely to accumulate first and most consistently: broad market vehicles, total market exposure, large cap index exposure. In the uploaded source, the examples given are VTI and SPY. Those are not magic. But the logic is easy to understand. If new money is being democratized into retirement channels and the average participant is not turning himself into a stock analyst, then broad index ownership becomes one of the most likely default destinations. That matters because it means the dumb trade may still be the smart trade. Owning the main market where new flows tend to concentrate is often more intelligent than trying to outguess which niche beneficiary will win the headlines for 6 months. Fay file a site, Fay turn 59 file 0 Fay. This is Buffett logic, whether people recognize it or not. When the system is channeling money toward broad productive ownership, own the productive system. Do not get seduced by the noisiest derivative of the story. Own the river, not just one fish in the river. That is the fourth mechanism, the ownership mechanism. When policy is quietly training more citizens to become recurring buyers of broadest assets, the long-term opportunity usually sits first in broad ownership, then in selective secondary beneficiaries. That is where I would start. Not because it is exciting, because it is sensible, but I want to say something else too, because the richest insight in the uploaded document is not actually about retirement accounts. It is about how the economy really works. The average person thinks the economy is built for wage earners and that investing is an optional side game for the financially curious. That is backward. The economy increasingly behaves like a machine built to reward asset ownership first and labor second. Labor matters. Labor is where most people begin. But labor alone gets taxed, inflated, and exhausted. Ownership gets scaled, ownership gets subsidized, ownership gets matched, ownership gets political protection, because too much of the pension, retirement, and wealth system now depends on rising asset values. That is the deeper lesson here. The new IRA structure matters because it teaches that lesson to people who were previously locked outside the classroom. It is a doorway. And what the doorway leads to is not merely retirement savings. It leads to a different identity from worker only to worker plus owner. That is a profound shift. A low-income worker who gets a match into a retirement account is not just receiving assistance. He is being invited into the compounding machine. That invitation may not solve everything. It does not fix low wages. It does not fix inflation. It does not fix housing. It does not fix medical costs. But it does something still very important. It moves one more person from pure dependence on labor income toward partial dependence on capital income. And once enough people make that shift, the country itself changes. That is why this is bigger than a retirement account comparison. It is a redirection of economic identity. The danger, of course, is that people still misunderstand the system after they enter it. They hear free money, open the account, and still fail to learn the deeper lesson. The deeper lesson is not government gave me a match. The deeper lesson is I need to own where the money is going. That is what the financially savvy understand. If more payroll, more subsidies, more retirement flows, and more debt fuel public support are all heading toward markets, then the person who owns none of those assets is standing in the rain while wealth is being redistributed above his head. That is harsh. It is also true. So when I look at this whole story, I do not see a political gimmick first. I see a structural broadening of the asset owner class. I see more low-cost retirement access. I see fees becoming a bigger public issue. I see portability becoming more important than employer loyalty. I see government matching behavior being used as a behavioral lever. and I see another channel through which debt policy and asset prices keep finding each other. That is the complete picture. And once you see that, the right response becomes much clearer. Do not obsess over slogans. Do not obsess over whether one brand name of account is better in some tribal sense. Do not obsess over the politician. Obsess over the direction of money, because money direction is what changes systems. If the system is quietly moving toward broader participation in low-cost market ownership, then the people who understand markets and own quality exposure early will still have the advantage. That is what I would want the reader to feel at the end of this piece. Not partisan excitement, not partisan disgust, clarity. The retirement system is being widened. The stock market is likely to receive more structurally recurring buyers. The government will almost certainly help fund part of this with the same debt. Softened monetary world that keeps asset inflation alive, and the people who know how to own broad productive assets will still be the ones best positioned to win. That is the point. Not that the 401k died, not that one new website saves America, but that one more gate to compounding is opening. And in a country where ownership matters more than most people are willing to admit, opening the gate changes everything downstream. That is what I see, and that is why I pay attention.